Chase, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I'm really delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Nice to finally meet you, and looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, likewise. Look, we've been chatting off air. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Chase, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
For us, it means scaling in a sustainable way. We're a bootstrapped startup in the tech space, which is a bit of a unicorn, not in the billion-dollar way, but in just being a rare bird, I guess. We really look at our growth in terms of our people. We're a people-first organization, and we don't put a lot of emphasis on vanity metrics. We don't put a lot of emphasis on metrics in general, to be honest. We're really focused on getting the work done that we feel collectively is really important to us. And so we don't focus a lot on getting a lot of people through the door and hiring a lot and how many employees are we or what's our valuation. We're trying to serve our customers, create awesome products. We have a motto that's we want to do everything we do at a world-class level, and we hold ourselves against that, and try to have fun in the process and make sure that our people don't burn out and that they're enjoying their work and they're fulfilled. And by treating those inputs the way we do, the outputs have been fairly successful. And so yeah, I mean that's what scaling for us means. It's a bit of a slow and steady wins the race sort of approach, but our retention hovers in the 90s percentiles, and we have a lot of fun doing what we're doing. People stick around and enjoy it for the work that they're doing every day. And I think that's really core to our being as a company that's been around for 15 years, and one that is competing with some of the wealthiest companies in the world. I mean, as a small bootstrap startup, we're going up against the Slacks of the world and Microsoft, and we're holding our own, which I think is pretty cool.
That's brilliant. Well done, you. Well, I became a user of Todoist a number of years back when I interviewed Paul Akers on the podcast, who is an absolute lean maniac and an advocate of all things productivity. So if Paul Akers is recommending your product, it was good enough for me, and I've been using it for a couple of years. So well done, you guys. You're clearly an exception. It always confuses me when people talk about seed and Series A and Series B and Series C. I'm an old-fashioned scaler. Revenues, vanity, profit, sanity, and cash is reality. And so that's that. I believe the fundamentals of a good business exist regardless of the business in whatever space. So well done. You guys, as you've described, have been around for 15 years. For those who aren't familiar with Doist's story, Chase, can you give just an abridged version of your scaling story to date, and if you maybe allude to some of the pillars of success along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. So the company is Doist, and there's always a little bit of confusion around that. So the company is Doist, and we have a few products, the most famous of which is Todoist, which is a to-do list on steroids, kind of a product that you just described there a second ago. And that product is used by 30 million people around the world in 19 different languages. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that we're a team of about 100 people spread across 35 different countries, working completely remotely since day one. So we're hyper asynchronous, which we can get into a little bit later, and but fully distributed, remote first, and that's baked into the DNA of the company. So that's sort of where we are today. But the beginning stages were basically our CEO and founder is a developer by trade, and he was running another actually like a social platform startup out of Taiwan that was doing really, really well, and he was just unhappy with the to-do list products out there. He's kind of a productivity guy, and so he just built his own mousetrap. He said, I don't like what's out there. I'm going to build my own, and built it. And then he kind of shared it with his network, and people started saying, hey, I would buy that. That's great. And so he started selling it, and then he needed a support team. So he started hiring people on what was then Elance and later became Upwork. And before you know it, they needed to be full-time employees. He needed designers, he needed marketing folks, and all of a sudden he had a business, and that business was fully remote, sort of by accident. And so fast forward to today, and we've got a small suite of products that all kind of fit into that same niche. And we've sort of carried that mindset forward, not just the remote thing, but also we have another product called Twist, which is a direct competitor to something like Slack or Microsoft Teams that most people are probably familiar with. But Twist was born out of the same sort of mindset that Todoist was, in that we didn't like the products that were out there. We didn't like Slack. We were running this very asynchronous remote team spread across every single time zone, and Slack felt very synchronous, very rapid to us. Like we weren't thriving in terms of communication. So we built Twist and said we're gonna build our own tool here. That we want our own communication tool, and if people buy it, that's great. But we're gonna build it for us. And it turns out people did buy it. I mean, we've got hundreds of thousands of teams running on it now, and including ourselves, we're our own power user. And so there's something cool and scrappy about that. I think that's been really nice to continue to embrace. And we've held on to that scrappiness by being bootstrapped, not taking funding, and making sure that we're focused on just the products that we think serve our customers' needs, and we're our main customer. So as long as we're serving our needs, then we should be serving the needs of other remote first teams, which obviously there are many more of today than there were 4 years ago. So that's yeah, I mean, I think those are some of the inflection points.
Yeah, look, let's get into there's quite a bit in this. It's interesting because I interviewed Bob Mesta, a wonderful guy, a number of months back, and Bob mentioned, especially for engineers, software engineers, mechanical engineers, to fall in love with the customer struggle, not your own product. And clearly, you guys have your origins are in actually solving your own struggle. But I'm going to pull you back here because for our listeners, you've brought some jargon to bear. Maybe I've just been too remote here. You say you're hyper asynchronous versus synchronous. Can you explain what those terms are, Chase, for our listeners, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Forgive the slang there. So asynchronous and synchronous are two terms we throw around quite a bit. And synchronous is basically what we're doing right now. The most synchronous activity we could be doing would be syncing up in person in an office, meeting face to face and talking at the same time. You expect immediate response from me, and I expect immediate response from you. The same is true in this case. You and I are synced up over Zoom right now. Hopefully there's no long awkward pauses or 24-hour waiting periods for me to respond to you. But in the async world, and the async is the shortened term that a lot of people use because asynchronous is just a mouthful, right? Async is the opposite of that. It's not expecting immediate response at a most fundamental level. That's what it means. So a lot of teams are on, if you look at this spectrum of synchronous to asynchronous, a lot of teams fall somewhere in the middle. They do some asynchronous work, which would mean like I send you an email and I don't expect that you're going to respond instantly. Whereas if we're using a chat tool, the idea, it's called instant messaging. So it has instant baked into it. And that instantaneous activity is what, as a remote team, doesn't really work very well, especially when you get into a distributed team across time zones. It's just not realistic to expect an immediate response when your teammate's potentially sleeping. And it's also, there's a lot of data around how it kills productivity and such. So, so anyway, we lean very hard on that spectrum way into the asynchronous. We have a 24-hour rule, for example. So when I send something, I don't expect a response within 24 hours. I may get a response within 24 hours. I might get it instantly. But the idea is our whole communication stack is built around the fact that when I send something, I'm not expecting an immediate response. And there's a lot of trickle down effects that has on the way that we work. But that's sort of what it is at the core.
We'll get into the culture in a moment. You've referenced you don't expect a response. In this async world, I'm curious because I find I'm moving more and more away from email, for example, which I suspect falls into your async category of communications, to like WhatsApp voice messages. I just find my phone's in my pocket. If an idea comes into my head, I'll record a voice note, drop it into the channel. What's your views on email? I mean, what do you guys prefer? What's your medium of choice in terms of communicating this async environment?
So the thing is about sync and async is, especially when you're talking about written form tools. So let's set aside like video conferencing, anything where you would obviously be synced up at the same time. But any written form of communication, in theory, could be used very synchronously or very asynchronously. You and I could be having an email conversation where the culture of the company says that like, I better respond to you in 30 seconds. And so we're firing emails back and forth. It's not very efficient. It's not the best way to communicate. You'd be better off in like a tool that's built for that. And at the same time, that's the culture of that company might say, I don't expect a response within 24 hours when you email me. And so also not very efficient because we all seen these email chains pile up and you've got 30 people on there in BCC and CC, and it just becomes a nightmare to dig through it. It's also not very formatted very well. Generally, like reading through it can be a mess. So, so anyway, there are tools that are specifically designed to facilitate that. But I think the key is like when I talk to companies who are making this transition from a more synchronous environment to an asynchronous environment, they're very focused on the tools. And I think it's more important to start with the mindset and the practices and what's the culture around the tools going to be, and then pick the right tool to fit your culture. So in our case, I mentioned before, we were using Slack, right? And Slack is built as some people call it an asynchronous tool. For us, it felt very synchronous. It's actually built as a chat tool to facilitate instant communication. It gives you channels where you can build out, transparent conversations, and you can categorize conversations, and that's all really, really awesome. And so what we did is we just wanted to take that mindset, but infuse a more asynchronous tool set around that with Twist. So, and Twist is where 99% of our communication takes place. We don't have very many video calls or phone calls. We don't have we don't use email at all. I mean, we have Gmail accounts for external communication, but we don't communicate internally with it. Everything takes place in Twist.
And without getting into the features and benefits of Twist, but I'm curious, what differentiates Twist from, say, email on the one side, and a lot of our listeners will be used to Microsoft Teams or Slack, as you've mentioned. What are the nuances of Twist which make it much more functional in a remote environment?
So a lot of what we decide when we were making our hard decisions when we were building Twist, a lot of what's built into it is what's not built into it. And so what I mean by that is there's no like red receipts. There's no presence indicator. There's no notifications, are very minimal. They're off by default and very minimal at best if you want to turn them all on. So the idea is that we want you like picture two tools, option A and option B. One of those tools wants you to be in that tool. Twist wants you to be out of that tool. That's the approach that we took. We take the mindset that if you're chatting, you're not working. So real work happens outside of our chat tools, when you can get into deep work mode, when you can think, when you can collaborate and build and design and all those things. And then you come back to your chat tool to communicate. And so like for me, for instance, like I check into Twist like twice a day. And so when I talk to other teams who say, yeah, I spend 8-9 hours a day in Slack or Teams or something, I'm like, what are you doing? Well, I'm chatting with, I'm sending stuff back and forth. And like, when do you ever get real work done? Throw in like these companies that have a ton of meetings piled on top of that, and you go, I just don't know when you get the meat done, and so that's the nuance of it. And the other thing I'll say about that we really wanted to put in there, and at the time, like Slack and Teams didn't have threads. Actually, they were just channels, and then all the communication took place in channels, and then threads were added on top of that. What we did is we actually put the thread at the center, so the threaded conversation is actually like the main focal point of the of Twist, and then the channel is sort of like secondary to that. So there's a topic focused conversation or thread. There's a topic focused thread for every conversation. So as opposed to having multiple conversations happening in one place, you have very topic focused conversations happening in one thread, almost more like email. And that keeps things very organized for us.
You've mentioned culture quite a bit since we began the podcast, and I'm really curious to understand the culture of Todoist. To give a little bit of color, you mentioned at the outset you are servicing 30 million users across 19 languages with 100 people. How many countries is that 100 people spread across, Chase?
It's 35 countries.
Wow.
And all time zones.
Wow.
And you know what I think is really cool about that is if you do the math, like just simple math, about one in every third person is from a different place, which makes our culture very dynamic. It's very interesting.
So let's get into that. What characterizes the Doist culture? Let's say if I started in the company and you did not communicate to me your values, and I came back after 2 weeks and you asked me, what are the values of the company? What are the behaviors and characteristics that you're noticing within the company? What am I likely to say?
I know what people say, so I don't mean to beat this drum too hard, but the first word that's going to come out of your mouth is asynchronous, because you're going to go, God, these guys are over the top asynchronous. Like, can we have a meeting every now and then? And then, people adjusted it, and it's true. Actually, a little caveat. I'll come back to the answer, but when I took over as head of remote, one of the first things that we looked at and the biggest projects we wanted to facilitate was like, how do we do a better job humanizing this whole thing? Like, we're pretty good at the productivity stuff, and we've got that down, we've got the remote work thing down, but we're missing something on the personal human side. And so actually, like I've talked to my counterparts at other companies who are trying to convert very synchronous in-person companies to a more asynchronous remote setup. And I'm kind of doing the opposite. I'm infusing more synchronicity into our async mindset. So I think asynchronous would be one thing. I think you'd hear a lot of people talk about balance and people first. That really is not; those aren't just buzzwords that we throw around. I mean, we're very focused on the individuals. We take that stance that we need people to show up as the best versions of themselves, and so we're willing to bake in like lots of time off and vacation time, health days, both mental health and physical health. We wrap it all up into one. Collectively, we've got 52 days off per year to disconnect from work. And when I say disconnect, I mean like really disconnect. We have the kind of half kidding the vacation police that make sure people aren't working when they're on vacation, and so we take all these things seriously. And I think the third thing is mastery. It's one of our core values, and we put a lot of emphasis on people taking time to master their craft, making sure they have time to explore new crafts and connect with other Doisters around things that interest them, both inside work and outside work. So I think these are some of the things that, I hear people say when they've been around for a few weeks, few months, when I start chatting with them about their experience, that these are the things that come to their mind first.
So asynchronous, people first, and mastery. Can you share with the listeners because there is a challenge. I was at an event last Friday. I was speaking to a partner in one of the large board accountancy firms. We're now coming from a number of years spent, on and off, pocketed in working remotely, and there's now a question. An argument for getting everyone back into the office again. People are talking about having missed the social connection. I interviewed a wonderful lady called Margaret Heffernan a number of seasons ago. Margaret uses the analogy of an organization being like a brick formed structure, and the bricks being the people, and what happens between the bricks is the mortar. And she used the term social capital. She says that social capital is built, it's built during the morning as you're walking into the office. You're asking people, how was their weekend? What did they do last night? Did they see the football? The having lunch with one another, going, something that we implemented years ago when I was the CEO of a scale up. We introduced Fitbits, and so we had walking clubs at lunchtime, and all of these practices and these little habits and rituals were helping to create that social capital, really create the mortar between the bricks, which ultimately, forms the culture. I'm really curious as to how you guys do that in Doist. You switch on Zoom and meetings. I was in meetings from 9 o'clock this morning until 1 o'clock. There was zero time dedicated to how are things over in India at the moment. What happened at the weekend in the cricket. There was none of the small talk. We started at 9, we got straight into the meeting, and that went on for quite a number of hours. So over to you, Chase. Convince us how this happens.
Oh, that's easy. No problem. No, the thing is I totally get it. I mean, I'm an extrovert by nature. I used to work in a more corporate environment, which involved a lot of, or a more traditional corporate environment. Although I was working remotely, I had quarterly on-sites, actually lived near the HQ. So I was going to a lot of happy hours and, after work events and participating in those running clubs. And I actually really enjoyed all that stuff. So I'm not a hater of those things. But here's the trick is that, and I will also say, I wrote an article that outlines literally every single activity that we do, which perhaps we could link to, or
Brilliant.
if you just want to Google, Chase Warrington, humanizing async communication or humanizing async, you'll find the article. But I literally listed out every single activity that we're doing. And the key here is it takes effort and intentionality. You don't have, in the remote world, you don't have this ability to just walk into your office every day and have those little chit chat moments. And that social capital that she was referring to is so important. So you have to have someone actually create the space for that. And the company has to see that as part of the workday. So we take that really seriously. I mentioned this was kind of my my P1, my top priority for the whole first year I was in this role, was really just honing in on how we create more space for people to connect around work things, but also X of work. And so those are all both really important. And we do that in a handful of different ways. And they're kind of in 3 broad categories. One is synchronous in person. And that, so what we mean by that is, remote first, which is what we are, doesn't mean remote only. We bring people together twice a year. We bring people together for retreats, and we invest a pretty hefty percentage of our revenue in bringing everybody together. So 100 people from 35 countries once a year for a week in one place. This past year, we rented a little village in the Austrian Alps. Next year, we're going to Tuscany, and we've rented a property out there, and we're going to spend a week working on that social capital. We don't use a lot of that time, which goes against kind of the common belief. We don't use a lot of that time for hard work. It's what we call soft work. So we're spending a lot of time on the social capital and building out those relationships and things like that. Doesn't mean we don't do any work. We do. There's some bonding that takes place around the work, which is key to our culture as well. But that's primarily what that time is for. We also fly out new hires they get a mentor, and they go spend a week with their mentor in person. So they're getting a good first taste of what the company feels like working very asynchronously and remote. But then also we're going above and beyond by saying, hey, you really need to go spend some time in person. We're humans. We crave that social connection, and that's important. So every 6 months you've got something like that to look forward to, which I think is key to our success. The second bucket is virtual and synchronous. So we have a variety. Every month we have 2 or 3 different activities that people can join. Those range from just what we call casual hangouts, where people can just jump on you get randomly paired with 2 or 3 other teammates, and you get to opt in, which optionality is a core fundamental of all of these things. We don't force this on anybody. If you want it, if you need it, you crave it, then take it. If you don't, bow out and go spend more time with your family, whatever it is that you need, but this is there for you if you choose to. And so we have anything from like random casual hangouts to structured cooking classes and workouts together and things like that. Then we've got asynchronous, and virtual. And those are activities where we actually have like spaces where people are connecting around subjects that they're really interested in, from crypto to chess to traveling to parenting to gardening. We've got a variety of conversations happening in dedicated spaces around that. And we've got a variety of games going that are at any given time where people are participating asynchronously. So we're creating these spaces that, it's not the same as what you might get in a in-person setting, in a co-located setting, but we're working with what we have. And on top of that, I think we're filling that social cup for people enough to where they can truly enjoy all the flexibility and benefits of being remote and all the great things that come with that without losing completely the social connection.
Wow. There's again so much in that. What makes an exemplar uh, remote working environment? How do you continue to cultivate this environment?
So one of the things that I think I've studied a lot of these successful remote teams, and there's a lot of not successful ones. Like I actually witnessed remote gone bad at a very young age. The first remote worker that I knew was my mom, who somehow, like through a miracle, convinced her boss to let her work as a nurse from home, and she turned her job into a telework job like 20 something years ago. And anyway, it was awful. It went terribly. It was a toxic culture where you were tracked, every movement was tracked, and there was no social capital built in. It was just you were a robot on the other side of a screen. And so I think remote gone bad can be really, really bad. And that's why I'm so passionate about the intentionality that you need to place on creating a really good experience, because I think it can be amazing. And so one thing that is core to that amazing experience that I've seen across all of these remote companies is that they subscribe to that Netflix mentality that they made famous with we're a team, not a family, and that it's okay to focus on the work and to make work what really unites us. So we say we bond around our work first. That's the thing that actually unites us, literally. It's why we're all on one team together. It's because of the work that we're doing. And then the things that I just mentioned a little bit ago are more on the periphery. So our culture isn't. I think it would make our culture very fragile if we focus too much on the casual hangouts and the retreats and things like that. Those are the side dishes. The main dish is the work and how we get that done. And to go a little bit further on that, we've created, for example, our own system for how we manage projects. We work in what we call the do system, which is a series of projects that are happening in 4-week sprints. And every month you're working on projects that you're really excited about, and you're getting paired with other people around the company and therefore around the globe that are also passionate about that project. And so it's giving you this chance to work with people from, I'm working with a guy from Brazil and a guy from Russia and a guy from Canada on one thing, and we're all really excited about this feature or this web page or whatever it might be. And that gives us something to really connect around.
Yeah.
And so I think that's real. I mean, that's what pushes us forward and keeps people interested in the core values. Like, how do you keep up mastery? Well, you keep people interested and keep people fired up about the work. And so it's sort of this like flywheel effect that happens, and it's worked really, really well for us, I think.
What strikes me about this, Chase, is that, and I'd like you to speak to this, that the purpose is clearly very strong. People are
Yes.
motivated around the purpose. You're saying the work first, and I read that as the purpose is strong, so people are motivated around the work. The vision is clearly it's clearly communicated very well, and the goals aligned to that vision are, again, given what you've described, articulated very clearly. So ultimately, people are allowed to literally deliver. They're accountable for the results, but the results, obviously, there's obvious clarity in relation to what success looks like, and accountability within the culture as well. Can you speak to all of that?
Yeah, you said it better than I could have, and I kind of kick myself for not mentioning this earlier, because this is so key, the accountability bit. Because to be a super asynchronous team like we are, to operate this way, to let people work from wherever they want, when they want. We don't have set hours. We don't expect people to be online at any given time. We hire people. We have some people who are nomadic and floating around, although most are stable wherever they are. But everybody designs their own schedule every single day, and we think that's a superpower of the team. Imagine like you can just pick your perfect workday every single day. But to make that work, you have to have a lot of trust, you have to have a lot of transparency, and you have to have a lot of accountability. And so we put a lot of emphasis on creating accountability, making it very clear what we're saying we're going to do by when. Todoist helps with that, by the way, and makes that pretty simple. But that's our vehicle for creating accountability, and it's very simple. You deliver or you don't. And this is very key, because in a remote world, successful remote companies, that's all you have to go on, because you don't get any credit for walking into the door when we don't have a door and we don't have a
Yeah.
place for you to see you walk through the door. There's
Yeah.
some statistics that show like when the average office worker walks in for their 8-hour day from 9 to 5, they might work about 2 hours and 45 minutes of like real work, like 3 hours maybe. The rest are littered with other activities, or focusing on other things or doing things that aren't really productive. A lot of times sitting in meetings where they're not actually producing anything. So what we've done is we said the only way to do this is to allow people to work when they want and to create accountability, set clear goals that we're going to hit or not hit. And then we just measure ourselves against that. We don't care how long your butt's in the seat. And so that really drives a lot of our focus on work is just set the goals, make it very accountable, and let's see where everything falls after that.
Can you speak a little bit more around the goal setting process? Have you guys gone out with like a 10-year vision, brought that down into 3 years, into 1 year, and then you mentioned 4-week sprints, so have you monthly like objectives, key results? Can you share with the listeners what you're doing in relation to that? Because this is so this is so critically important. I think the fact that you guys are getting this right, there's real gold in this. So get super practical in terms of what you guys are doing, Chase.
Yeah, what's funny is I don't think we were very good at this for a long time, and I'm not sure that we're awesome at it even yet in a lot of ways. And I can give you a little bit of context. So, like a lot of startups, we were born from just some guys having some idea and building a product and say, hey, we should throw a button on here, or we should add this feature. Okay, no, remove that feature. Nobody likes that. And a lot of it came from the gut feeling and what we think we should do. Not very data driven. We eventually graduated to a place where we were more like data informed, and I'd say we're still sort of in that space now, but we've really tried to remove a lot of noise. We have a few North Star metrics that we focus on that we tie everything to. We literally just reduced or just revamped our mission statement and core values, which was just taking for instance our core values from 6 to 4 and refining our mission statement to build the future of work. It's very short, very simple, kind of broad, but also like just gives us a North Star to focus on. We have one metric for each product, and one of those products being the company itself that we tie everything to. And then we have strategic priorities, what we call strategic priorities, which take place in 6-month increments. So we have 3 strategic priorities each semester, and those strategic priorities should all connect up to our mission statement. And so we're working on those on a rolling 6-month cycle. But it's a long way to say that I think we're still refining this. We were born from this idea of just kind of like doing things that felt right, and we're moving into a place where we're really trying to get more strategic about it. And we just had a leadership retreat in Amsterdam a few weeks ago where we went through all of this, and like I said, just refined it all and came out with an amazing new 3-year plan that we're going for. So I think we still have a lot of room for growth in this area, which is exciting, I believe, because it's something we can actually build on.
Yeah, brilliant. You mentioned the leadership retreat. What skills do you feel that, or do you now know leaders need to have when they're managing teams remotely?
I think the first is to not overanalyze it and remember that people still they want their leaders to be leaders, and I've seen a lot of people really try to reconfigure who they are or reconfigure the way that they lead. But your team's looking for leadership, strength, empathy. They want to know that you've got their back and that you've got a plan, and those details are communicated very succinctly but thoroughly, which is something that we need to be very clear. And I think the remote world just forces you to convey that in a slightly different way, and it forces you to be a bit more alert and empathetic in terms of how you perceive how your team's doing. There's some tools emerging to help with this, but it's for example, when we have on average, most leaders have one-on-one with their direct reports per month. I took a survey recently of the team, and let me see if I can recall the metrics exactly. Don't quote me on this exactly, but it was something around like 90% of the team has less than 2 hours of meetings per week. And nobody reported having more than 6 hours, I believe, on average. Our CEO, who the CEOs of tech companies are normally their calendar just looks like a jigsaw puzzle of meetings. He's on average has about 3 to 4 hours of meetings per week, and there's some funny tweets out there of him sharing his calendar. So the thing is, the reason I say all that is it's hard to judge. The downside of that is it's really hard for me to know how you're feeling, what's going on in your life, if I'm not seeing you and talking to you and hearing your voice. I might ask you on chat, in Twist, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's fine. Okay, things are good. But you need to be able to tap into that a little bit more as a leader in the remote space. So you mentioned the meetings that you were in earlier. When we have meetings, they're usually the exact opposite. There's not a lot of work being done because we actually think we can get the work done better in the async world. So we use that sync time together to build that social capital, to get to know each other, to find out how people are doing, to work through the pain points, things like that. So we're inverting what the idea and the purpose of a meeting is very different for us than it is for a lot of companies.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. So given your role as head of remote, and I'm not sure, did that role exist prior to COVID? Because you were probably the first head of remote globally, I would imagine. It's probably become very popular since, but given your role as head of remote, what do you see now, Chase? You're clearly a passionate advocate for this type of working environment. So what are the advantages as you see it now? You've been working in this environment for quite some years. Share with us the advantages.
Yeah, I mean, when I first I've always worked remotely. I started my career in January of 2009, and I was able to secure a remote role at that time. It wasn't location independent, but it was remote, and I didn't have to go sit in a cube, and that was good enough for me. I could go to a coffee shop or work from home or whatever, and traveled a lot, and so that was the flexibility to work where I wanted was always very important to me. And through the first 2/3 of my career so far, I would say that was really the driving factor on a personal level. I just want to be able to live where I want to live. I'm an expat now. I'm an American that currently lives in Spain. That's currently talking to you from Germany. And I, setting COVID aside, like to travel a lot, and my wife and I do a good bit of that. So that's always kind of been core to me on a very personal level. And remote works allowed me to do that, which I'm very grateful for, but I don't think it's the reason that remote work is important. I can get to that in a second. The other thing is that I think it's become more important to me on a personal level is the when I work. So I mentioned earlier, being able to design your perfect workday every single day for me is a superpower, not just on an individual level, but on a team wide level. I have some insomnia. I wake up at odd hours of the night. Working in a more traditional environment, it would screw my days up so badly because I'd be ready to go at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, and the day doesn't start for 4 or 5 more hours. So by the time I show up to work, I'm already drifting off again. And so just extrapolate that across, hundreds of people, thousands of people who all have their individual challenges and problems. And I think that ability to create your workday, make it optimized for your workflows. I have a very finely tuned schedule that works perfectly for my energy levels. I do things like this, how we're talking now, like in the afternoons, because it fits perfectly with how I'm usually feeling in the afternoon. I do my deep work in the mornings. I have a long break for exercise, which re-energizes me, and it's helped me get into better shape and things like that. So this what and when are very important to me on a personal level, but more importantly, like much, much more importantly, remote can do so much good for us on a societal level, on an environmental level, and an economic level in terms of like infusing cash, jobs, and a stronger economy into developing nations, places like that. So for example, I've released and I know I'm rambling a little bit, but it is something I'm just really excited about. I released an episode on my podcast today about a guy who fell on a really, really smart guy, from Lebanon, had gotten his master's degree in Barcelona, went back to Lebanon, country fell on hard times. He's capable of doing anything, but he's just in a place where he just had no opportunity. Remote work literally saved his life, gave him opportunity, allowed him to take care of not only himself, but his family and his parents, and relocate everybody and build a whole new, better life for him. And so I've got countless stories like this. It just happened to be that today his episode went live, and it's top of mind for me. It can change people's lives, and it provides people opportunity that otherwise wouldn't have it. And then there's a lot of environmental factors, like for instance, I mean, removing we don't want to go too far into this because there's a lot of caveats, but like, for example, removing all the commuters that have transitioned to remote work has saved tens of millions of kilos of carbon emissions. And so there's a bunch of trickle down effects of all these things, but I just think there's so much that it can do if it's done correctly. And the key is to make sure that it doesn't get done incorrectly, which unfortunately a lot of people experienced during the pandemic. So,
Yeah.
and remote work gone bad is very bad, as I said.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time. There is so much in this. A couple of things I want to pick up on before we move into our close. The fact that you've been able to access people from more than 30 countries or 30 different cultures across the globe is just phenomenal. Let's be super practical. Where can you signpost the listeners to if they're curious to explore the potential of a remote worker for a number of positions that they might have available at the moment? Where do you guys go looking for these people, and are there any bits of advice you would give around kind of recruiting?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, for anybody listening, if what you've heard about Doist resonates, you can always check out doist.com/careers and make sure that we see if we have any positions open at the exact moment of this recording. I don't believe we do, but it's worth checking. There's a number of websites that I also like to send people to when they ask, where should I go looking for remote work? And fortunately, when I started looking for location independent work, what I have now at Doist, how I found my job at Doist, I found a list that had 72 jobs, 72 positions open where you could work from anywhere. That was 7 or 8 years ago. And today I bet there's 72 job boards that just cater to remote work. So you're in a much better position today than I was then. Some of my favorites though are remotive.io, Flex Jobs, and we work remotely. And one that I'm big on that's just come out now is called JobGether. And they do a fantastic job actually rating the company that and how well they do remote. So we're moving beyond just offering remote. Now people want a really good remote experience, and you should demand it. You should expect to have that. And so JobGether is actually rating companies based on how well they do remote and the perks and benefits they offer to support you. So I recommend those. If you're looking to get remote work, we have an awesome article on our blog, blog.doist.com. There's a whole remote work section, and there's actually an article on there that really walks you through like how to nail your remote work exploration and job interview and all of that. But the one key I would tell everybody is remote teams put a lot of emphasis on writing. We communicate almost completely in the written form. So any written part of your application, do it to a very high degree. That might sound obvious, but a lot of the interview processes that you've probably been through in the past have been very focused on the interview. And we're not so focused on your interview. We're looking for how you write, how you communicate in the written form, and then later we'll get to how you communicate in the more synchronous form. So
Yeah.
that's a little trick that a lot of people overlook. I've seen some amazing candidates come through with 10 years of experience applying for a junior role, and they think they're just going to fly through the form questions that we ask, and those questions are there for a reason, and they don't make it through. So
That's
little
great
bit of
advice. Yeah, great advice, Chase. Anything else for employers, for our listeners who are in the most, business owners, business entrepreneurs, business leaders who from this, I suspect, will be very curious about exploring the talent that exists out there and hiring that talent in and managing that talent remotely. Is there anything that they should also be mindful of whenever they're actually going through that interview process? Communication skills, you've mentioned the importance of the written word, really critical. Anything else that you have changed in recent years as a result of your experience?
Yeah, inserting a test project into the interview process is really key. And I think especially if you can figure out some way to make it collaborative, so you actually get to see how that person works in real time. Not real time as in we're logged on at the same time, working on the project at the same time, but in, over a couple day period as we would work in real life, where they might have some back and forth and questions to ask with a counterpart. That's been a huge game changer, increased our chances of success massively. A little bit more investment on the front end, but massive retention benefits on the back end.
Yeah, look, I was a big fan of tryouts way before COVID hit and we were working remotely. I think tryouts is a wonderful way of getting to know someone and really testing someone beyond the traditional interview process. Just before we move into our close, have you guys ever considered, moving into an office or moving to a hybrid working environment? And if you have, what tipped the decision to continue working remotely as you are?
What's funny is we did by accident. At one point, we had a group of coworkers that were all happened to be in the same city in Porto, Portugal. Friends just kept migrating there, and I won't bore you with the whole story, but we ended up with a little core of people in Porto, and the CEO being one of them, and we recognized a big problem very quickly, and the CEO was very quick to break it up, and he moved away. He moved to Barcelona and kind of changed things. But we there was a sphere of influence happening offline that was taking place there in that office, where everybody else became outsiders. Conversations were taking place that others weren't privy to, and so we had to go in a different direction, totally by accident. It was a little bump in the road, but what I think is funny is that it was a bump in the road. It didn't empower us. It harmed us.
Yeah.
So no, we've never gone back to considering it.
And this is really interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of companies now are migrating back to the office. And this is something that I've heard that they're challenged with, where they haven't mandated for people to be in the office on certain days. That's just happening organically, naturally. But for those who have maintained working remotely, there is this sense of being left out. What would you say to those business leaders listening who are trying to manage and be flexible with their teams who have been used to remote, now migrating back to the office, trying to manage something that we've termed hybrid? Is there any advice you can give?
Yeah, I think there's two quick points. One is you want to focus on giving people a location agnostic experience. So that means just wherever they're tuning into to work from that day, it should feel the exact same, whether they're in the office or whether they're at home or from a cafe in Paris or whatever it may be. They should have pretty much the same experience. And to facilitate that is the second point, which is you want to make sure that you've kind of pressure tested every aspect of your company to work for the type of setup that you want it to be. So if you want it to be remote first, consider your tool set, consider your practices. Are they optimized for the old way you were working or the new way? If you're hybrid now, same thing. Are the tools and processes you're using optimized for when you were fully in the office or when you were fully remote during the pandemic or somewhere in between? Because there's a suite of options out there for you now to use, but you want to make sure that they're excuse me. You want to make sure that they're tailor-made for the situation that you've set up for yourself.
Yeah. Wonderful advice, Chase. I cannot believe the last hour has absolutely flown. I always, I
looked at the clock. It's been an hour. Whoa.
There is so much in this. It's just fascinating. I mean, people are really, really wrestling with it at the moment. Practically, can you signpost them to any material that they can read that you would recommend in relation to managing and optimizing a hybrid working environment, for example? I know your work is wonderful. We put links to some of your latest articles and whatever else you feel that will support our listeners. But anything else that you would recommend people look to or listen to?
Yeah, absolutely. The one other thing I should mention, it's a shameless plug for one of our things, but I think it's really, really valuable for anybody that's really interested in this async thing that we've been talking about. We have a content team that is solely focused on creating content about async communication, and they do a phenomenal job breaking down the nerdiness level is on very high level. So we go deep on async and best practices. We bring in experts who are nailing this, and so if any of that made sense to you, just Google the Twist async newsletter. It's really, really well done. So that's one that I would recommend. And then there's a number of podcasts and books and things like that. I feel like if I start rattling off any of them, I need to rattle off all of them. Yeah. But the one in particular I'll plug is that from a podcast standpoint is a friend of mine. Her name is Daphne LaForest, and she produces a podcast called Remote First. And she talks with hybrid leaders, remote leaders, people who are really sharing some in-depth knowledge on how they're making remote work at scale. They're often people from companies that you've heard of. Yeah. And then from a book standpoint, a little bit in a different direction. Huge fan. If you're building a global team, The Culture Map is a phenomenal book to teach you how to consider how people around the world work in different ways. And it's so powerful. This unlocked a bunch of magic for me in terms of how people think about problem solving and praise and gratitude. And it really, really changed the way I look at working with people from different corners of the world. So I can recommend that one.
Brilliant. Chase, thank you so much. You're a man, despite your young looking years, who has huge experience in this field. I always post my guests the closing question to share with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways.
Oh, wow. I should have prepared for this one. I love it. I love it. So, well, let's see here. So I guess the first one that I will mention is we are very big on the Eisenhower matrix. And so if you're unfamiliar with the Eisenhower matrix, it's urgency versus importance. And you just need to, urgency versus impact is a better way to put it. Refer to the Eisenhower matrix whenever you're trying to make a decision. Remember that remote first doesn't mean remote only. So no matter how far on the async remote spectrum you go, it does not have to mean that you are remote only. There's a place for in-person collaboration and getting together. It's just about utilizing that time specifically for those needs. And then, remember that the future of work is now. Things have changed. It's time to adapt. Let's just give it a shot and evaluate. And let's not say it's been going that way. We've been doing this way for so long. Why would we change? Let's look ahead and see what we can make of it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think COVID has certainly been the catalyst for that, and as there's maybe a kind of a bounce back towards the in-person connection, but let's hope it settles somewhere in between, I suspect, in terms of the right mix and giving people the flexibility to literally produce great work wherever they wish to produce that work, aligned to a wonderful vision and anchored into a fantastic purpose. So, Chase, can you share with our listeners what's next for you?
I'm really excited about the future of what we've got going on right now. We're obviously big advocates for the future of work and all of that. And we've got some big things coming with our products, Todoist in particular, for teams looking to really master collaboration, execution, and planning. We're building something special that's right on the horizon. So be on the lookout for that. We learned something recently. We put a ton of emphasis on communication in the past with Twist, but about 70% of what employees, what people in knowledge work are working on right now is planning and execution. And that's yet to be really solved in a wonderful way that's not overly complex. And so we're trying to build something simple but powerful that will serve those needs, and I think it will. So that's what's on the horizon for us.
Oh, brilliant. I'm really excited to hear more about that. So whenever, have you a release date?
Yeah, it's called TBD. No, but it's a Q1 initiative,
Okay.
and a long time coming in an alpha state right now. So in a closed beta, actually.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, excited to hear more about that. Chase, if anyone wants to connect with you, which I've no doubt they will, given that you've piqued a lot of people's curiosity about the environment that you guys have cultivated in terms of optimizing remote working, how best to connect with you?
So I spend a lot of time on talking about remote work in particular and the future of work concept on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best place to connect with me. I'm a recently returned to Twitter as well at DC Warrington is where you can find me there, trying to chime in a little bit there as well. But a lot of the communication and the updates and thoughts are taking place on LinkedIn. So that's definitely the best place. I mentioned our blog earlier, in the async newsletter. I think those are two great places. You can also find me hanging around there, writing there. But those are probably the best places to connect.
Brilliant. Well, look, I must call out, you're now one of LinkedIn's top 10 voices. Certainly, when I was connecting and doing a little bit of digging yesterday, you released a great article. I must acknowledge the great work that you're putting out there and around this topic. So I wish you continued best wishes with everything that you're doing, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you, Chase.
Oh, thank you so much. This was an absolute blast. You're right. The time flew by, and yeah, I appreciate it. Some great questions and a lot of fun. So thank you.
Thanks. Take care.